Welcome back, deep divers. You know, when we started this show, I thought we'd be exploring dusty old books. But today's pick is really something else. I mean, we're talking psychic sensing, astral senses, and even get this, crystal gazing. It's William Walker Atkinson's Practical Psychomancy and Crystal Gazing from 1907.
Ah, Atkinson, a fascinating figure in the early 20th century occult scene. He was prolific, writing under various pen names, covering a vast array of esoteric topics. But what's particularly striking about practical psychomancy, at least from my initial reading of the Global Gray edition, is that it's not your typical introductory text on psychic phenomena.
Right. He doesn't spend much time trying to convince you that any of this is real. He kind of jumps right in, assuming you're either already a believer or at least willing to entertain the possibility. It's like he's saying, okay, so you're interested in psychomancy, let's get practical.
Exactly, and that's where those core concepts of the astral senses and the astral body come into play, which, as you've highlighted in your notes, are central to his entire system.
Yeah, for Atkinson, it's all about this idea that we don't just have the five physical senses we're all familiar with. He's saying we've got a whole other set, five astral senses that operate on a different level of reality, what he calls the astral plane. And get this, these senses are linked to a subtle body, the astral body, that's like a counterpart to our physical body.
It's like a mirror image of our physical selves, but existing on a subtler, more energetic level. And it's through this astral body and these astral senses that psychomancy, the psychic sensing, supposedly takes place.
You got it. So today, we're diving deep into Atkinson's world. We're going to break down what psychomancy actually means in his system, how he distinguishes it from other psychic stuff like, say, clairvoyance. Then we'll explore those three categories of psychomancy he outlines: simple, space, and time psychomancy.
And of course, the million-dollar question, how do you actually develop these abilities? Concentration, visualization, psychometry, and of course the one that always captures the imagination, crystal gazing. It's all there in Atkinson's text, almost like a roadmap for psychic exploration.
So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly is psychomancy as Atkinson defines it?
Well, he starts by breaking down the term itself. Psycho, relating to the mind or soul, and mancy, meaning divination or sensing. So we're essentially talking about psychic sensing. But what's interesting is how he immediately distinguishes psychomancy from clairvoyance.
Yeah, he makes a clear separation. Clairvoyance, as he understands it, is about perceiving beings on another plane, like seeing spirits. But psychomancy is specifically about sensing objects through these astral senses.
Right, so things like psychometry, where you hold an object and get impressions from it, crystal gazing, perceiving distant scenes, even getting glimpses of the past or potential future events. He's talking about all of these falling under the umbrella of psychomancy. And this sensing, as he describes it, can occur in various states of consciousness, from full alertness to a more relaxed, receptive state.
And you know what really struck me? He's just so matter-of-fact about the reality of all of this. It's not a debate for him. He kind of points to the existing research and literature as if to say, look, this stuff's been established. His focus is on the practical application.
He even says he's not interested in theoretical speculation. He wants to present what he calls the time-honored teachings of the advanced occultists regarding these astral senses and the astral body. It's presented as almost a hidden tradition of knowledge.
Okay, so let's talk about those foundational concepts. The astral senses and the astral body, what's the deal with those?
Atkinson lays it out pretty systematically. He explains that just as we have five physical senses, we also have five corresponding astral senses, and each one mirrors its physical counterpart but operates on this astral level.
So there's astral sight, astral hearing, astral taste, astral smell, and I think this one's really interesting, astral feeling, which he describes more as a kind of overall awareness.
And each of these senses has some pretty remarkable capabilities. For instance, with astral sight, you're not limited by physical barriers. He says you can perceive things at a distance, see through objects, and even access records of past events imprinted on what he calls the astral ether.
He even suggests you can catch glimpses of potential future events. Coming events cast their shadows before, as he puts it. Now, whether you buy into that or not, it's a pretty evocative image, right?
Absolutely. And astral hearing, it's about sensing sounds over vast distances and even across time, like those astral vibrations can somehow linger. Then there are astral taste and smell, which admittedly he doesn't go into as much detail about.
And then there's that fascinating fifth sense, astral feeling. He describes it as more holistic awareness, picking up on subtle impressions, feeling the emotions of others, even experiencing what he calls sympathetic pains, feeling the discomfort of someone far away.
It's like a heightened empathy. but operating on this astral level. So those are your tools, so to speak. Now, how does the astral body fit into all of this?
Well, Atkinson describes the astral body as an exact duplicate of your physical body, but made of finer ethereal substance. And usually it's coexisting with your physical body, kind of nestled within it.
But he says that under certain circumstances, like during dreams, periods of intense stress, or through specific occult practices, this astral body can detach and travel independently.
Yeah, he talks about it moving at incredible speeds, faster than anything in the physical world, but still connected to the physical body by this long, filmy connecting link. He assures readers that it's very rare for this link to break under normal conditions.
So imagine this. Your consciousness, housed within this astral body, is able to separate from your physical body and travel to distant locations, maybe even across time. That's where things start to get really interesting in terms of psychomancy.
Right, because Atkinson explains that the astral body is often the vehicle through which these psychomantic phenomena happen. It's what's traveling to those distant scenes during dreams or even under hypnosis, allowing a person to perceive what's happening there.
He even touches on why our memories of dreams can be so jumbled. He says it's because the physical brain isn't always equipped to properly interpret the impressions the astral body brings back. It's like trying to translate a foreign language you barely understand.
So understanding these two concepts, the astral senses and the astral body, is essential for grasping Atkinson's approach to psychomancy. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
He's basically saying if you don't get this, you're not really understanding psychomancy as has been traditionally taught in occult circles. Now, once he's laid out this groundwork, he gets into those three classes of psychomancy.
Yeah, and he categorizes them based on how the astral senses are receiving impressions. So first up is what he calls simple psychomancy.
Which, as you mentioned earlier, is marked by a heightened awareness of those etheric vibrations and auras. It's like your astral senses are quickened, as he puts it, making you more sensitive to the energetic environment around you. But it doesn't involve perceiving distant events or things from the past or future.
It's more about the here and now, but on that subtle, energetic level. So you might be able to pick up on someone's emotional state or the energy of a particular location more acutely.
Right. Then we move on to space psychomancy, which gets a little more, well, spacey.
Pun intended.
Maybe a little. But seriously, this is about perceiving scenes or events that are happening far away. And he proposes two main ways this can occur.
First, there's the astral tube, which is like a psychic tunnel or a focused beam of consciousness that you create with your will to connect to a distant location.
Almost like building a psychic telescope to zoom in on something far away. And then the second way is through astral projection, where your consciousness, housed within your astral body, actually travels to that distant location.
So in one case, you're remote viewing, and in the other, you're basically taking an astral trip. Pretty wild stuff.
And finally, there's time psychomancy, which is all about sensing things that are located in the past, those records you talked about, or getting impressions of potential future events, those shadows of coming events.
I gotta say, that phrase just sends chills down my spine. It's like, are we really just puppets of fate, or do we have some agency in shaping the future? Big questions.
And Atkinson does acknowledge that time psychomancy is the most difficult and least understood of the three.
He also addresses clairaudience, or psychic hearing. Now, some people might consider that a separate category, but Atkinson says it's not.
Yeah, he basically says clairaudience is just the application of astral hearing, following the same principles as astral sight. So you could have simple clairaudience, space clairaudience, and so on.
Makes sense. So we've got these foundational concepts, the classes of psychomancy. Now let's talk about the practical side. How do you actually develop these abilities?
Because Atkinson is very clear that he believes everyone has this potential for psychomancy lying dormant within them. He even suggests those flashes of intuition or premonitions that people experience are like little hints of these abilities trying to surface.
And this is where belief comes in, right? Atkinson emphasizes the importance of faith in the possibility of developing these powers. He's saying that doubt can actually hinder your progress.
But beyond belief, what are some of the specific methods he recommends?
Well, he lays out a few key practices, and they're actually pretty straightforward. The first one, and he stresses this again and again, is concentration.
Yeah, he says most people don't truly know how to concentrate. Their minds are constantly flitting from one thing to the next.
And to build that concentration, he recommends really focusing on simple, everyday objects. He says, study them in detail, observe their subtle features, and do this repeatedly. It's like mental weightlifting.
Train those mental muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And what's next? Visualization.
Yep. Visualization. He says you need to practice creating clear, vivid mental images. Start with familiar places, then move on to imagining unfamiliar scenes. He even talks about mentally traveling to locations.
It's like building those inner landscapes and strengthening your ability to hold mental images steady,
And then we get to psychometry, which we talked about a bit earlier.
where you hold an object and try to get impressions from it.
Exactly. Atkinson's advice is to take an object, maybe something that belongs to someone you know, and just hold it against your forehead, close your eyes, and try to be receptive. Don't force it. Just see what impressions come up.
He says you might get a mental picture of the owner, sense their personality, or even get flashes of their recent experiences.
And he encourages people to experiment with different objects, metals, minerals, even plants. He mentions some people use psychometry to find water underground. It's all about tuning in to those subtle vibrations.
And then, of course, we come to crystal gazing, the method that probably drew a lot of people to Atkinson's book in the first place.
Right. It's the one with that kind of mystical allure. And what's interesting is that Atkinson is very clear that the crystal itself doesn't have any inherent magic.
He says it's simply a tool, a focal point for your concentration and intention. He compares it to a telescope, which helps you see distant objects more clearly, but doesn't actually possess any inherent power of sight.
And he debunks all that stuff about needing special rituals or incantations. He keeps it very practical. He recommends finding a quiet space, facing away from direct light, and just gazing calmly at the crystal. He even suggests cupping your hands around it to block out distractions.
But what about those people who try crystal gazing and don't see anything right away?
Patience, patience, patience. That's Atkinson's mantra. He says to start by visualizing familiar objects within the crystal, just to get the hang of it.
He describes those first signs of seeing as a subtle cloudiness or a milky mist that gradually forms within the crystal. And then, as you practice, those vague shapes might start to resolve into clearer images or scenes.
He even tells readers to check out a specific lesson in the book where he goes into more detail about the techniques of crystal gazing. But the point is, it takes time and dedicated practice to develop these abilities.
Okay, so let's circle back to simple psychomancy, that first level where you're more attuned to the immediate energetic environment. What else does Atkinson say about that?
He clarifies the distinction between simple psychomancy and telepathy, which is something most people are probably more familiar with.
Thought transference, right? Sending thoughts from one mind to another.
Exactly. And Atkinson says both involve the reception of thought vibrations, but they operate through different mechanisms. Telepathy, he believes, is primarily a function of the physical brain and the pineal gland.
Whereas simple psychomancy utilizes the astral senses, which, as we've discussed, are much more refined and sensitive.
So you might be picking up on those subtle vibrations that completely bypass your physical senses. It's like having a sixth sense, but one that's tuned to a different frequency.
And he even suggests that developing telepathic abilities can often lead to the unfolding of psychomantic powers. It's like they're interconnected somehow.
Yep.
Now, what about the aura? He mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, the aura. He describes it as this egg-shaped field of psychic energy that surrounds people and objects, and it's constantly being influenced by thoughts and emotions.
So it's like an energetic signature that reflects your inner state. And he says people trained in psychomancy can actually see the colors of the aura, and these colors correspond to different emotions and thoughts.
He even quotes this well-known authority of his time who describes the different auric colors and their meanings, but he also acknowledges that not everyone can see those colors. However, he says most people can at least sense the overall feeling or quality of someone's aura.
Like whether their energy feels generally positive and welcoming or kind of negative and repelling.
Exactly. You know, you've probably met people who just have that certain vibe, good or bad, even if you can't quite explain it. Atkinson would say you're probably picking up on their aura. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of simple psychomancy, the ability to see hidden things and even to perceive through solid objects.
Now, that sounds like something straight out of a superhero comic book.
It does, right. But Atkinson explains it by comparing it to X-rays, which were a fairly new technology back then. He points out that X-rays can see through solid objects by perceiving energy waves that are invisible to the naked eye.
So he's saying that astral sight is similar, but it's picking up on even finer, subtler vibrations that our physical eyes just aren't equipped to detect.
And he gives examples like being able to see into adjoining rooms without physically being there, reading the contents of a sealed letter, or even seeing into the ground to observe things beneath the surface.
But are there any limits to this ability? Could you theoretically see anything anywhere, regardless of distance or physical barriers?
Atkinson acknowledges that, just like with physical sight, there are limitations. He says the clarity of astral perception decreases with distance, just like a light gets dimmer the farther away it is. And he compares trying to see through miles of solid earth to looking through murky water. You might get a sense of what's there, but the details will be obscured. He does suggest that the astral tube, that focused beam of consciousness, might offer a way to overcome some of these limitations when it comes to perceiving distant locations.
What about using this ability to see inside the human body? That's something he touches on, right?
He does. He suggests that with practice, you might be able to use astral sight to examine internal organs and potentially even diagnose diseases. But he's very careful to point out that this isn't a replacement for proper medical training. It would simply be an additional sensory input that would need to be interpreted within the context of existing medical knowledge.
So it's not like you can suddenly become a psychic surgeon just by developing astral sight.
Right. You'd still need to know what you were looking at and how to interpret those subtle energetic signs.
So in a way, Atkinson's book is both a fascinating glimpse into historical occult thought and a potential guide for those who are curious about exploring their own psychic abilities.
It definitely sparks a sense of wonder. And it makes you think, if Atkinson believed that these abilities were latent within everyone, what other human potentials might we be overlooking or underestimating?
It's a question worth pondering. And maybe, just maybe, some of those seemingly unexplainable experiences, those flashes of intuition, those gut feelings that turn out to be right, those dreams that feel incredibly real, maybe those are hints of something more, something that we're only beginning to understand.
It's a fascinating thought. And on that note, we'll leave you, our deep divers, to ponder the mysteries of psychomancy and perhaps explore your own inner landscapes. Until next time, keep diving deep.